Welcome everyone, welcome. This is the training we're doing on Planning Commissions, Planning Commissions 101, and this is based on the passage of House Bill 3136. That's kind of the moment in time. That's the reason why we're doing a training on Planning Commissions. Let's talk about it. So, House Bill 3136 passed in 2025. It was one of various bills that the Oregon Realtors as a lobbying group has pushed for. What it did is modified two elements of Oregon law, ORS 215030 and ORS 227030. Each of those bills has their own version, or rather those statutes has their own variant of the language that you see on the left-hand side of the screen. Previously, the language was, no more than 2 voting members of a planning commission shall be engaged principally in buying, selling, or developing of real estate for profit as individuals or be members of any partnership or officers or employees of any corporation that is engaged principally in buying, selling, or developing real estate for profit. This is in ORS 215, which is related to cities, and ORS 227 that is related to counties. So both counties and cities have planning commissions. These two statutes were about their membership and who can be on a planning commission and how many people it's supposed to have and all that stuff. And there was a restriction that said specifically you could have no more than 2 people that were from any single occupation on a planning commission, which is replete throughout the entire process. That's pretty normal. It says essentially like you can't have 9 barbers who are all on the same planning commission because they're going to overfavor the factor, the things that are beneficial to the barber industry is kind of the idea behind that. But then in Oregon, in addition to the restriction on overrepresentation within a single individual occupation, there was a unique binding element that said, also, we're going to count everyone that buys, sells, or develops real estate for profit as the same job, the same occupation. So if I have, for example, an architect who works in the development of real estate and they make their living off of it for profit, and a person that works with a title company who is part of the buy-sell process of real estate, then theoretically I couldn't also add a building, like a home builder, onto that same planning commission because I already had 2 people who bought, sold, or developed real estate for profit. Now, that language, we'll talk about it, there's all kinds of things about that, but that language was modified with House Bill 3136, specifically both ORS 215030 and 227030 for cities, for counties, has been modified to now read, if a planning commission has 5 or fewer members, then no more than 2 voting members may be engaged principally in buying, selling, developing real estate for profit and all the rest of that stuff. But what that means is if a planning commission has more than 5 members, 6, 7, 8, 9, most planning commissions in most mid-sized towns have 7 to 9 people on their planning commission. At that point, the planning commission no longer has this odd binding element that says everyone that's in the practice of real estate anywhere in any way. You no longer are the same occupation. Now you can have 2 architects, you can have 2 home builders, you can have 2 real estate agents, you can have multiple people from the real estate sector representing the part of the city's planning process. So the takeaway of that change to the law is now is the best time for a real estate agent to get involved in land use planning, because previously you had restrictions that made it much more difficult for you to be a part of land use planning, and now you don't have those same restrictions that existed before as long as you're in a city of a certain size. Now, why was House Bill 3136 something that we pushed for? The original variant that said no more than 2 real estate professionals can do this stuff, it was based on what were called the Tillamook County Planning Wars from between 1971 and 1973. The story of it is quite saucy. There was a planning commission in Tillamook County that had 9 people on it, and of that 9-person planning commission, 6 of them openly flaunted their conflicts of interest. There was one that was a realtor, one that was a developer, there was one that was a builder, one that supplied lumber, various occupations. And oddly enough, it wasn't like there were 6 people that were real estate agents on that planning commission, but just 6 people who had conflicts. And they started allowing and rejecting various designs and builds based on what lined their pockets more than others. There were times where, for example, there was a large motel on the coast that they just ramrodded through and approved. And the argument from everyone else was like, don't do this. The locals said, please don't do this. The citizens that lived in the area said, this is not, we don't want this, we don't need this, this is not necessary. The city planner or the county planner said, please don't do this, this is not appropriate. The state's economists said this is not necessary, but they pushed it through anyways. And oddly enough, one of the guys on the planning commission actually had a shareholding stake in that motel. So conflicts of interest abound. That created a real fervor for a while. In the 70s, there was quite a bit of ink spilled on the newspapers about these Tillamook County planning wars, where they said, like, this is insane. The Tillamook County had a local planning director who said, essentially, guys, I don't think you should do this. They ignored him and then immediately afterwards fired the guy. And there were questions about whether even a planning commission can fire people. Do they hire this guy? What can they do? All kinds of stuff went wrong. After the firing of the planning director, the state essentially said, Tillamook County Planning Board, you guys should really, or the commission of Tillamook County rather, said, you should quit. All of you should resign. To let this thing get slid under the rug. And all of the conflicted planning commissioners said, no, we're not going to do that. We are going to stay on because we don't think we've done anything wrong. And it got worse and worse and worse, and there was essentially a game of chicken that no one blinked on, and it got to a level where the legislature said, fine, we're going to fix it. And in 1973, they had two bills that they put forward, one that changed the stuff on cities, one that changed the stuff on counties, and those two bills had 11 solutions to stop future planning war problems. It was things like the Planning Commission can't fire city planning staff. They aren't the body that has that authority. If you have a conflict of interests, you can't vote on that item. That was not part of the law until 73. So like all kinds of solutions, some of them very obvious ones, like don't vote when you're conflicted, but some of them were less obvious. And one of the 11 elements was, hey, no more than 2 real estate professionals can be on planning commissions because clearly we have a problem. Now, if you put that in, even in 1973, it wouldn't have changed Tillamook in any way. But that was one of the things that was pushed forward. There were some people in Douglas County that were like, if you only knew how bad it is out here. We have the rolls of who all was on the Douglas County Planning Commissions at the time, and no, there were not more than 2 people from a real estate profession on it. So there was just fear replete throughout the industry, and as a result they put this like giant hammer slam to solve the problem. And at the exact same time, like a couple months earlier, Senate Bill 100 happened, and we were on this tidal wave of land use planning and the comprehensive plan and McCall stopping these sagebrush subdivisions and coastal condomania and all that stuff. So essentially it was just a really bad time to be in any way involved in development if you were not like super pro Oregon environment, Tom McCall, rah-rah, kind of that sort of stuff. So that all passed through. Arguably, the restraint that said no more than 2 people on a planning commission from this specific profession is unconstitutional under the Equal Protections Act. There's a case law that is directly relevant where at the federal level, Congress said essentially no more food stamps for families that have multiple people from multiple families living in the same house, with the express intent of we don't want hippies to use food stamps. And the courts looked at that and said that you can't just make a law for no good reason other than you don't like this politically unpopular group. That's unconstitutional. That's not how this works. That's against the Equal Protections Act. And our Equal Protections Clause of the Constitution. You can't do that. And Oregon has law that says our Equal Protections Clause is the exact same as the federal one, functionally identical. We have case law where they said that, so if you can saying we don't want to give food stamps to hippies because we don't like them as a group is unconstitutional, we can probably say we don't want real estate professionals on a planning commission because we don't trust them is also unconstitutional. Now, it didn't have to go to the point where there was argument about unconstitutionality of that bill. We weren't fighting over that, but the law has changed to avoid that in totality and to basically just put an even level playing field in place. Now, there is still the restriction that says no more than 2 people from a specific profession, but there is no binding, no tying together that says by specific profession within the context of real estate, we mean all of you. Everyone that touches real estate, y'all are one profession. Instead, now it can be broken down on the narrow ways that Oregon allows other things. On a planning commission, there's attorney general statements that essentially say you can have 2 people from the same large profession as long as their subdivision of profession is different. So for example, you can have 2 ranchers and 2 orchardists and 2 farmers. That's fine. Each one is a different occupation because they do different stuff. They're all in agriculture, sure. but they do different things within agriculture. Now the same is true of real estate. You can have home builders, you can have real estate agents, you can have people that work for the title company, you can have all of those things separately, and they're not considered the same singular profession. Which means, if you are a real estate agent who's wanted to get involved in a planning commission, but you were worried because you read the rules and you saw that there were too many people who were already doing real estate adjacent jobs, this was the case, I think, in Corvallis. There were a couple areas in Oregon where that was just literally the stop point for why someone was not allowed to even think about joining a planning commission. That's not the case anymore. Now, you still can't be the third real estate agent on a planning commission, but you can be the second one or the first one, and that's great. And I would encourage all of you to join planning commissions, and that's what most of this training is about, is teaching you what a planning commission does. They are incredibly relevant. By way of peeling back sort of my history and explaining why I'm the one talking about this, before I started working with Oregon Realtors, I was a private practice attorney who was a city attorney in the county of Yamhill, and I worked with planning commissions for a substantial portion of my job. I was a city attorney that worked with city councils and planning commissions, and I wrote the guidebooks for a fair number of cities on how their planning commissions were supposed to be treated, or how they were supposed to be taught, what they were supposed to do. So my background in planning commissions is robust. I have spent a lot of time with them, many hours, talking about tree plans and what was on the site design review and all that stuff. So let's talk about it. What is a planning commission? What do they do? So a planning commission is a local government's quasi-advisory body. That's kind of the broad description of it. It's not part of the local government in that it's not invested with the power to really do many things as far as the local government is concerned. It is able to, however, advise. It is a delegation of the city council's authority to do stuff related to land use. Usually this means that the council is given all of the task of listening to the facts and listening to staff reports and listening to people's testimony, and then providing guidance to the city council. Oftentimes, the planning commission will make a recommendation that is either adopted by the city council or rejected by the city council, but in the end, you are what amounts to an advisory body. All you're supposed to be doing as a city planning commission in most situations, city or county level, is to make recommendations to the city council. Now, most of the time, the city council will listen to the recommendations of a planning commission. Not always, but most of the time they will. And it's the reason for that is essentially you can spend several hours in a planning commission meeting. They can be 4 hours long if it's a really complicated thing that's going on. And the city council isn't necessarily spending all those 4 hours listening to the same stuff you are. Over the course of many weeks, you might go back and forth with the same developer many, many times over a site design review and what all conditions you're going to add to it. You can modify the plan, you can make it work better for your city, you can do all kinds of stuff. And the city council lacks almost all of that context because most of the time the city council has not been present at the planning commission meeting. So when the planning commission says, look, we looked this whole thing over, we listened to all the testimony from all the people, and we listened to staff, and we think it would be a good idea to approve this site design review. The city council will go, we trust you, because that's what we put the planning commission in place for. It is to make recommendations with knowledge, and the city council trusts their planning commission in most situations, unless there's a breakdown like there was in Tillamook County in the 70s. A planning commission is created through statute in large part. And the statutes allow city councils to create a planning commission, and they can do all kinds of stuff. Broken down into a list. This is 227090, which is the city council one. So I think I did my numbers wrong in the earlier part. 215 is counties, 227 is cities. 227090, there's always a corollary for the county side one. 215090 will be arguably the exact same thing. Powers and duties of the commission, but it'll say unless otherwise provided by the county council. A county planning commission may. So it basically says what they can do. A planning commission can recommend and make suggestions to the city council and other public authorities concerning laying out, widening, extending, and locating public roads. You can make roads, parking of vehicles. Where do you put a parking lot? Where do you put side parking on the road? You can make recommendations. How do we relieve traffic congestion? How do you do betterment of housing and sanitation conditions? If there's, for example, the need to site some sort of new sewer line or something like that, city council is going to have some, or the planning commission is going to have some element of the planning process on that. The establishment of districts for limited use, height, area, bulk, and characteristics of buildings. You can modify the zone and design requirements. It's why some areas of a city may look historic and stay historic. The city can establish zones that essentially say, this is what houses in this place are supposed to look like. All Adobe houses in this area, because that's what we do over here. This is the Adobe house neighborhood. Protection and assurance of access to incident solar radiation. Protection and assurance of wind for potential future electrical generation. Recommendation to the city council and other authorities to regulate future growth, development, beautification of the city in respects to public and private building and works, cities and all that other stuff, making the city look nice, giving it an aesthetic feel. It's the reason why some cities have kind of that look and feel to them. Like, think about if you've ever been to Sisters, Oregon. Sisters, Oregon is a great example of a planning commission that knew their objective. They wanted it to look like a cowboy town, and it looks like a cowboy town. That's what you can do with planning commissions. Recommending to the city council and the various other public authorities plans for promotion, development, regulation of industrial and economic needs of the community in respect to industrial pursuits, encouraging people to come to the city. Encouraging industrial settlement within the city. You are the cheerleader of the city, trying to encourage them to do stuff, and making economic surveys to potentially show why there's industrial need in the city, and lastly, to survey local industries and see what you need to do. And then there's a kitchen sink thing that says do all the other stuff that you got to do. And that kitchen sink one, that 227090H, or 1H rather, that is where most of the job of a planning commission comes from. All that other stuff is stuff they can do. The vast majority of a planning commission's time is spent conducting hearings and reviews for planning decisions that are based on the provisions from ORS 227010 through 227180 and those various subsections within that. So essentially most of the planning commission's time, even though it's not specifically laid out in the statute as the thing they do, most of what they do is hearings, listening to people who are arguing why they should build or why they shouldn't be allowed to build, or listening to someone say why, for example, they don't think that subdivision down the road should be allowed to be built, all kinds of stuff. Now, for what the planning commission does, broken down, there are really two things a planning commission does. It advises the city council or the county council through recommendations and suggestions. This is the forgotten element of planning commissions. The other thing they do is they conduct hearings and reviews for planning decisions. You do the hearings, you listen to people say, here's my site design, I'm going to build an apartment complex. It's going to have trees in the front. It's going to have, I don't know, a fountain in the front. It's going to be so pretty, and you can say why that matches your city's needs or doesn't match your city's needs, and whether there should be conditions and all kinds of other stuff. The planning commission has those authorities. That hearing and planning review is what most people think of when they think planning commissions, but a substantial element of what you're statutorily allowed to do as a planning commission is to advise the city on what needs changing. And that is the part, from my experience of planning commissions, that is not utilized like it should be. Planning commissions very regularly treat themselves like just a judge and very little else. But what a planning commission is the suggestion box. You are supposed to be able to say, hey city, have you thought about maybe adding a new zone that encourages the following kind of growth? Because we need it, or because it would be helpful. And the city council can make that decision, but the planning commission is supposed to be an advisory body that advises, rather than just recommends. It is supposed to advise. And some planning commissions do this, but the vast majority of planning commissions are procedural bodies that just do hearings and very little else. As for why you'd want to join a planning commission, there are all kinds of reasons why this can be helpful for your career as a broker. There is local volunteerism and local involvement. That's always good. You want to be part of the neighborhood. You want to be someone who's known as a good person that's helping the city out and trying to help your region, because that's just a good thing to do. Volunteerism is dying in America, and it shouldn't be, because that's how these things work. It requires volunteers to do stuff. It is not necessarily thanked work. It is largely thankless work a lot of times, but it is important work that needs to be done to make these enterprises operate the way they're supposed to. It can help. You can be part of the process of local government direction. You can aid in providing the local government with direction. What should we do? Hey, city, we should encourage middle housing, because that's the only way we're going to be able to build enough houses to be able to meet the needs this city has over the next 20 years. Maybe we should encourage middle housing. Or, hey city, we should discourage high-rise buildings in this area because it'll defeat the ambiance of the city, because our whole thing is being this idyllic place where you can look out at the lake all the time. And if we do high rises, the people in the back aren't going to see the lake. You can provide guidance on those sort of things. Within your practice, it gives you advanced insight of what your region is doing. This is not like you get secret knowledge that's confidential and you can just share it with your clients. This is just all public information. If there is a planning hearing on what the developer wants to build down the road, hey, I want to build a park that's it's an all ability park. It's one of those parks where if you've got a kid who's in a wheelchair, the park has swings that are designed for that. You will know about that way before most people do. You could go to all of your planning commission meetings as a broker. You could just go to them and sit in the back. It happens. There's one or two people that do. They just attend because they like it. But the vast majority of citizenry in Oregon does not go to planning commission meetings. And so things happen and they go, how are we supposed to know? It's been planned for like 8 months. They've been talking about it, and you would be involved in those 8 months of talks and would know about those things. You could say, hey, in this region, down the road, there is a new development going in. It is going to have the following amenities. There will be a soccer field that's being built because that's in the design. If they follow their design, it'll be there. And that is something you can tell clients because that is public information that you are not like secretly sharing. It's just there, and you just know the public information better because you were there. You can also use your advanced knowledge of real estate sales to inform the decisions of the city. Sometimes cities will say, hey, we want to sell this empty plot because we don't think we're using it right. And if you know what the market says, you can sometimes go, city, that's not necessarily a great move. This is a really bad time to sell a vacant plot of land. If you wait, you can potentially get a better price on that sort of thing. It's not necessarily the right move to do it now. And that sort of thing can help the city, help the county, it can help these things dramatically because you would just know things that you're able to provide when you provide advisory context as a planning commission. And the last thing, and this is probably most important from a broad kind of political perspective, is you can prove to the state of Oregon that you are not a monolithic sector of the economy. You are not a conflicted industry that is incapable of making reasoned and informed decisions about planning without having your own interests in mind. That was why the original bill was passed in 73. Is they said real estate agents, I can't trust them. I can't trust real estate agents. I can't trust home builders. I can't trust developers. I can't trust architects. I can't trust any of them because they are only thinking about how they can improve their life and their finances. They're not thinking about our local region. There was even in the testimony for this bill that passed in 73 that made this original restriction, a statement by the American Society of Planning Officials, is now the American Planning Society, or Planning Association, what do they call themselves? And it said, it was the planning commissions as viewed by planning directors. And they asked planning directors around this nation, hey, how do you feel about the following things? And one of their questions was, what about people who do real estate? And the statement, almost universally by planning directors, was some real estate professionals find it difficult to divorce themselves from their occupational thinking and the contracts and all that. They're thinking about their own job more than they're thinking about the city. But that's not an indictment of the occupation. That's an indictment of some individuals who can't help but be conflicted by as a person. You as an industry are not conflicted, and prove it to Oregon because you're given this chance right now. You are able to show we are not monolithic. We are not just inherently having like conflicts. We don't make every decision based on what's going to build the most houses that I can sell. That's not the goal. Your goal is to improve and to make it appropriate and to have the right kind of building done. And you as an industry are probably some of the most knowledgeable people that they can have on those planning commissions. In that same report, the American Society of Planning Officials, whatever they're called now, they suggested planning direct, if they said like if we had an ideal planning commission, it would have a lawyer, an architect, a builder, a commercial person who does industry within the region, a real estate agent. There were like 11 professions that were like, we want one from each one because they just know stuff we don't. But the vast majority of cities don't have access to all those professions. And that's why you should be on these planning commissions. Back in the 60s and the 50s, they knew it's helpful to have a real estate agent on a planning commission. And that slowly fell apart in the 70s where they said, we don't even want a single one on a planning commission because they're so untrustworthy. And we don't want to see their influence on these things taint this glorious version of Oregon that we had from Senate Bill 100. We don't want the sagebrush subdivisions. We don't want the condomania on the coast. We don't want that stuff. And you can prove that they were wrong in the 70s, that you are able to be mindful cautious, intentional thinkers about how Oregon builds and how it develops and how it changes into the future. Yes, we will share slides after this one, no worries. Now, how do you join a planning commission? And this is not just me like getting on a soapbox for the whole time. We are going to talk a whole bunch about like what a planning commission does on the nuts and bolts level, but for this part, it's still soapbox. How do you join a planning commission? Well, it depends on your city or your county or your region. Some cities, they nominate members. The mayor usually or the city council will nominate or appoint people, and that individual will then be allowed to say yes, or they'll say no, and they can join the planning commission based on being appointed or nominated. Sometimes there's some sort of a vote by the city council or the county council to make a decision on this sort of thing. In smaller cities, regularly commissioners just stay on because nobody else steps forward. Some of the cities I worked in, there would be situations where a city council, council would say like, does anybody want to run for planning commission? No. All right, John, you're on the planning commission for another 3 years. Yeah, thanks for your service. And that was just what happened because no one was looking into it. It is a forgotten element of governmental, like volunteerism at a governmental level, at the local government level. And it's something that if you look into your city or your region or your county, there is probably, unless you're living in a really, really volunteer heavy place, there are probably vacancies somewhere on one of the commissions for your local area. This is similar to like budget commissions. There are very rarely enough people on a planning commission or a budget commission to fill it out. And so regularly we just have either understaffed commissions or we have people that just stay on overlong because nobody else is going forward. Take part in it. Be a part. It's not difficult. There's rarely some sort of a conflict. There's very oftentimes not even a vote because there aren't enough applicants. So be aware, if you want to get involved, the space is there to get involved. Now, if we actually talk about planning commissions and what they are and what they do and what they look like, planning commissions are established by Oregon law, either through ORS 215 for counties or ORS 227 for cities. Most of the actual, like, what it looks like is found in municipal codes or county codes. Each city has its own version of laws. That should be something that you know about at this point. If you don't, then take a look at your local city's municipal codes because they can be really important for what you do in your job. Most of the city councils and county councils will have very similar rules and ordinances. There's usually like the League of Cities will produce some sort of a model code that they just say like, do this guys. And most of the cities say, yeah, all right, we'll do that. There can be regional variations, but most of the time it is very similar across the entire state. Example, City of Corvallis, this section of the city law establishes a planning commission. Planning commission is established pursuant to 227020. This commission is charged with advising and doing all this stuff. City of Salem, hey, we have a planning commission. It's created. It consists of 9 people. Planning commission in Eugene, we're creating a planning commission. It'll consist of 7 people. So it depends on where you are, how big the commission is. Some cities will have bigger commissions, some will have smaller. There is regional variation, but what they do will be very similar across the board. What planning commissions actually do are generally involved in what are called land use decisions, and they come in various types, various flavors. Oregon breaks it up into either 4 or 5 types of action. Some cities will have type 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'll also have type 1A, rather than just saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but usually cities will have between 4 or 5 types of action that they address. Those are generally going to be, it's going to be the same across the board in every single city. The type 1, type 2, type 1A, the low number type decisions, the lowest number, is a ministerial decision. It is something where county council and planning commissions are not involved. The city council doesn't ever look at this. The city planning commission doesn't look at this. Instead, city staff just receives the application, looks it over, sees if the boxes are checked, and says yes or says no. Generally, these are going to be things that have objective criteria to them. It's something where, for example, you want to apply for a block party permit, and the requirement of the city is something to the effect of, well, did you apply 20 days in advance, and do you have medical staff that's present, or something like that. You can apply to those, and as long as you've checked the boxes, the city's going to go, yep, okay, no problem, as long as there's not a conflict in scheduling or something along those lines. But generally, city staff makes the decision, nobody else. If city staff makes a decision and you disagree with it and you appeal with that decision, that's where some cities will send that to the planning commission in certain scenarios. So there's, for example, something that says like conditional uses within an area, and a conditional use is just objectively allowed as long as certain criteria are met. You've met those criteria, the city still says no, and you feel like it's arbitrary. If you appeal that, some cities will say, okay, let's take that to the planning commission. We'll have a hearing, planning commission will listen, and they'll make the decision on that thing that you think staff like fumbled on that process. There are generally no public hearings in type 1, type 2, type 1A decisions, these low number type decisions. It's usually something that just gets made without any input at all. It usually has very little to no impact on the land or the city itself. That is a type 1 decision. In some cities, this will be called type 2, but let's just call it type 3 for now. We're going to pretend we have 5 types is what we're running with, and types 1 and 2 are the simple planning staff decisions, or city staff decisions. Type 3 are quasi-judicial decisions. These are decisions where there's going to be some change to the city, some substantial change. So non-conforming use permits. Hey, I want to use this thing in a non-conforming way. Site design review. Hey, I'm going to build a building that looks a certain kind of way. Subdivision approval. I want to build 50 houses in this big empty lot and back. In these situations, a public hearing is required. You have to have a public hearing. People have to be notified about it. If they're within a certain distance of the thing being done, they have to know what's happening so that you can come in and give your own testimony. Hey, you should not build a subdivision back there. Why? Because that's the place where all the endangered cormorants land in the winter. And I know that because here are some pictures. You can bring up things that are relevant, and that modifies stuff. Planning commission meetings that are public hearings, the public can be involved. Having been at way more planning commission meetings than most people would be at this stage, there are very, very rarely that many people in these planning commission hearings for the vast majority of decisions, unless it's controversial. There are some decisions that get controversial. You'll have a whole bunch of people testify. For a large number of things like, hey, should we put in a bike lane? You'll have like one biker that goes, yes, we should, and there will be no one else in the audience, so it just kind of is what it is. I see a comment in chat. I am the land use chair of my city neighborhood in Salem. I'm involved with the planning process in a sense. In reality, though, the neighborhoods must be informed and are a required step in the land use application. Citizens, businesses, or neighborhoods have no say in the planning outside of the input meetings open to the public. Decisions are based on standing zoning and code. There are currently several changes within the City of Salem Council that are being involved with land use hearings to be determined. Yes. This is, so a lot of times there will be like a local, like an HOA might have people that are really attuned to the land use of the region, but if you are not invested with the authority through the city council, you usually don't have the ability to do much beyond just go to public hearings and go, I represent this large group of constituents and have the following opinions. This is where being on a planning commission can be quite helpful. If you find that a planning commission, for example, has been ignoring a large group of constituents, they just keep on approving all these builds in this one region of the city, and they're ignoring all the thoughts of that constituency out in that area where they don't like what's going on. At that point, someone from that group of constituents joining the planning commission means the voices in that region become heard more readily, or at least they're weighted more heavily by that planning commissioner, which can modify how the city makes decisions at that point onwards. And being involved means not just being involved for yourself, but generally being involved for your region and understanding something about, how the other people in the area around you want the region to look and how you want it to feel, and that informs the decision the commission makes. In these type 3 decisions, these quasi-judicial decisions, there is some discretion involved. For example, a site design review has some stuff that the planning commission can decide. Hey, we were thinking about putting in some palm trees. You can go, we don't do palm trees. Let's put in some pine trees because palm trees look gaudy and we're not California or Florida. So put in some pine trees because this is Oregon. You live in Sherwood or something like that. You can have decision impact on the site design itself and modify things as a planning commission through recommendation, essentially saying, we'd really prefer to look the following ways. The commissions can hear those arguments at a certain point. They will generally hear the arguments for and against the changes from the applicant. They'll hear from planning staff. Most cities have someone on staff that is the planning director or the planning person, and that planning director will be the one that provides the city's opinion based on our city requirements. You had to do X, Y, Z. They have done X and Y. They have yet to do Z. We could ask them to do this as a condition. They haven't done it yet, so here are our opinions on what should be done. You can add, the city staff will provide sort of the policy wonk version of planning stuff. And most of the time, in my experience, City planning staff is really, really good at their job and very accurate. And I would generally encourage people to listen to city planning staff because a vast majority of the time, outside of really controversial situations, they are very, very good at what they're doing. City council will oftentimes not be required to approve of some of these things. So for example, on these quasi-judicial decisions, do you approve the site design review? City council, if the planning commission says yes, city council never hears about it unless there's an appeal. In a lot of situations, if someone doesn't like the result of the planning commission quasi-judicial decision, they can bring it up to the city council and say, your planning commission didn't do this right. That's happened before. I've seen situations where planning commissions essentially say, we love what you've done and you've checked every single box, but we just don't want apartment complexes in our city because it would change the whole feel of our city. Even though that's not against the rules, we just don't feel like we're an apartment kind of city. That's not allowed. And that gets appealed to the city council, and the city council basically gets to make a decision and say like, yeah, the planning commission scuffed this one. They didn't do the decision right. They are bad. Sorry, planning commission is what the planning commission is. They won't do it again in the future, we hope, but just we the city council overrule the planning commission because if you checked all the boxes, it is allowed because the rules say it is allowed. That's a good clarification, Lee, on that one with the neighborhoods being not being HOAs and not being associations, but rather being sort of a neighborhood collective. I don't have a better term for that other than maybe I would hesitate to call you a confederacy of neighborhoods because that has other meaning, but that is kind of what it seems like it would be accurate to describe it as. There's probably a better term for it that I'm not using though. The next type of decision, a type 4 decision, are quasi-judicial decisions that have dramatic impact on the city. This is sort of a squishy definition, and cities will usually define their own version of what's a type 3, what's a type 4, that kind of thing. Type 4 decisions, something big is happening. We're changing a zone. We're annexing land into the city. We're making some big, big change that's going to radically modify availability of land or what land can be used for forever. It's going to be locked into the system. Planning commissions will hold a public hearing. Usually they'll hold 2 public hearings. They will make a recommendation to the city council, but they are only recommending. The city council is the ultimate authority that makes these decisions. The planning commission cannot change the zone. The city council can change the zone. City council oftentimes doesn't care about the zone that much. The planning commission has learned and heard from everyone and will have opinions about the zone. So when you make a recommendation, city council will often go, yeah, all right, that makes sense based on what you've said, and they'll listen or they'll disregard if the city council is strongly opinionated about that. The commission, the planning commission, will oftentimes hold hearings and listen to as much information as they can, supporting and objecting these changes. The city council is going to listen to the commission, the planning commission, but it's persuasive at best. The more compelling your argument is, the more likely you are to be listened to. The less compelling your argument, we just don't like apartments because it just doesn't feel like an apartment city. I grew up in a city without apartments and I don't want them here anymore. That's not compelling. And so you'll see different answers from the city council depending on how compelling or persuasive or how comprehensive and thought-provoking the response of a city planning commission is. The last one are type 5 decisions. These are legislative decisions. This is something that has to be done by the city council. It is a decision that, for example, modifies the rules. It says, the comprehensive plan encourages X amount of housing to be built and balancing it with industrial design and things like that. You can modify those rules on land use zoning ordinances. You can modify all kinds of laws and municipal ordinances within a city, but that's only something done by the city council. Now, within type 5 decisions, a planning commission is generally able to initiate the request. Hey, city, we want you to update your zoning ordinances to create a new zone. This is not us asking to make this exclusive farm use zone into a low density residential zone. This is us asking you to create a mixed use residential, commercial, industrial thing. We want you to create a new zone. That new thing under the sun, the planning commission can ask for it. They can provide guidance, they can provide knowledge on that, but they can't make the decision on their own. So the city council makes all that happen or not happen. But the planning commission usually has the ability to initiate these things. In some cities, the planning commission has to initiate certain actions. If you want to expand your UGB, The planning commission has to request it of the city council. The city council can also do it on their own, but generally the planning commission has to be the one that starts that process. And so there are some situations with the type 5 decisions, the planning commission is the one that lights the fuse and sees what happens, but the city council makes the decision. So if you're on a planning commission, type 1 through type 2 decisions, you're not really involved unless somebody appeals. Type 3, you're very involved. Type 4, you're a recommender. Type 5, you're an initiator, but you're not necessarily doing much else. As for what planning commissions do, there's a whole bunch of stuff. And you may have heard some of these terms in the past while you've been doing your job as a broker. That's perfectly, I would guarantee most of you have heard several of these terms, but this is what they really mean on a really broad-based level. Lot line adjustments. So this is normally something where you do it through a city application. Oftentimes the city just says yes or no based on the checkboxes. Sometimes there can be an appeal that goes all the way up to the planning commission. An application for a lot line adjustment moves the border between two properties so that it does not create a new lot, so that it doesn't cut somebody off from the roads or push a parcel below minimum lot size. It just moves the line a little bit. This is incredibly common. If you've ever, the situation where these come up most often is somebody's just been living their life for a while and then they decide to get a survey for whatever reason, and they look at it and they go, hold on a second. My neighbor has been using 5 feet of my side yard because there's a fence right here, and I thought the fence was my property line, but it's not. It's like way on the other side of the fence. And you go up to the neighbor and go, neighbor, you have 5 feet of my yard, or a little corner piece of my yard that you've been using, you fenced off, and that's a problem because my property is my property. So what are we going to do here? And sometimes the neighbor will go, oh, I'm so sorry, let me push the fence to where it's supposed to be, show me where the line is, we'll move the fence. Sometimes the parties just go, I'll sell you the land you've been using for the last 20 years. You can have it for $5,000, we'll move the lot line. Bob's your uncle, we're done. And that's where lot line adjustments happen, is someone saying we're just going to move the line. We're going to adjust the border lines between these two properties to match what we understand currently. There's all kinds of other uses for a lot line adjustment, but that's the one I've run into most commonly, is someone that says our historical understanding of the border doesn't match with the actual legal description, so let's just move the legal description to match our historical understanding. And that makes it valid. A lot line adjustment approved by the city, you put in all the surveys, you put in the deeds, you record all the stuff, and it's good to go. That is a lot line adjustment. If someone appeals, planning commissions sometimes have to hear about lot line adjustments. This does happen at times if somebody is contesting the way it's done, or if they feel like it's pushing the parcel below minimum size standards. You can have some third-party individual that goes like, this is not right, it shouldn't be done, you shouldn't allow this, it's going to encourage different use of the land or something along those lines. All kinds of reasons. Humanity is an exciting mosaic of opinions, and so is planning and land use. Conditional use permits. This is usually also a city staff decision. Zones will typically lay out what you can do within the zone. In a residential zone, you can build a house. In a commercial zone, you can't necessarily build a house, but law changes all the time. In an industrial zone, you can't, like a light industrial zone, you can't build a giant factory that does heavy machining. In a heavy industrial zone, you can. It tells you what you can do within a zone. The zone just, it lays out what is allowed. Some zones will have conditional uses that you can do in special case scenarios based on the needs of the local area. Oftentimes, an approval of a conditional use will be accompanied by many conditions. It's why it's called a conditional use permit. It allows you to do something as long as you mitigate. Example would be a residential zone allows bed and breakfasts as a conditional use, but if you build a bed and breakfast, you have to also ensure that you have increased parking so you don't put street parking underwater at that point, and you need to do something to mitigate the noise that might come from some people having their honeymoon at a bed and breakfast and, I don't know, laughing with their mimosas in the morning or something. And you need to make sure that all of these things are addressed through the conditional uses. The city can lay down some restraints that basically are reasonable restrictions. Now, sometimes a conditional use will get an unreasonable condition added to it. Hey, yes, you can have a bed and breakfast, but you have to give the city the back 40 acres of your parcel so that we can build a city park. That's not reasonable. You can contest those things, and that's where it would get brought up to a planning commission. You would basically say, planning commission, this is super unreasonable what the city's asked. And the planning commission can make a decision, and if their decision is something that you don't like, you can appeal it to the city council, and there's a whole process. But essentially, usually a city staff decision. This one is more of a discretion decision though, so you do see appeals on it every once in a while, and planning commissions will every so often have to make a decision on a conditional use permit where someone disagrees with the city staff, or a city might even say, conditional use permits, that's a city planning commission thing. We're just gonna hand that to the planning commission. Depends on your city. Variances. A variance is a situation where an applicant is requesting that the local government ignore or modify an existing rule in a way that doesn't harm public welfare while alleviating the applicant's hardship. Case in point, you have a city code that requires single-family residences have a front-facing garage that's attached. Just because somebody wrote it down 30 years ago and they just really like front-facing attached garages, darn it. And the applicant has a corner lot and they go, well, it would be super helpful because it's one of those little flag cul-de-sac communities and everybody drives down that little flag. What if I can just use the main road and just turn into my driveway off the main road? That would be super helpful, or vice versa. I want to be on the flag because then I don't have to fight traffic turning right or left onto my driveway. I can just go down the quiet street and make my turn. So they want to get a request to allow you to do a side lot. You can do those things. That's a variance. It's allowed in some situations. Oftentimes, this is something where a planning commission is involved because you are being asked to ignore a portion of the planning, like design standards, the development codes, or otherwise to do something that is a minor variant on that development code. It's usually kicked to the planning commission as something where they get to make a decision based on yes, no, it's harmful, it's not harmful. City staff will have some opinion on the harm to public welfare, what it does and how it helps, and the planning commission can make decisions based on the variance request. Variances you'll see pretty often when things start moving, like if a city starts growing a whole lot, you'll see a fair number of variance requests in some areas where the city zone codes and whatnot are not necessarily perfectly matched to what the new need of the city is. So sometimes you'll have something where somebody asks, can I do smaller lots and shrink the setbacks a little bit because I don't need a side yard on this one necessarily, or a little side yard. That would be helpful because then we can put one more house into this block when we're rebuilding or infilling. That sort of thing will generally require variances. The bread and butter of a planning commission, if you are on a planning commission, you will do a lot of these, are site design reviews and site development reviews. It is essentially someone saying, here's the plan, here's what we're going to do. You get blueprints, you get designs that are showing where the utility lines will come in, you get a whole bunch of diagrams and drawings and explanations and a plan for what they're going to be doing for this site. And the planning commission can look it over and make recommendations based on what they would like to see to make it sure it complies with local codes. So this sometimes is the case where a planning commission, for example, I worked with a city where we were putting in a tree code at one point, and the tree code was in the works. So it hadn't been adopted yet, but there was a heavy amount of discussion. It was basically just a rubber stamp away from being approved. We had a site design review come in, and the person wanted to put in palm trees. It's always palm trees, I don't know why, but they wanted to put in palm trees, and we were able to say, hey, just so you know, like a month from now, there are going to be new tree code requirements. If you look at our old stuff, this is the tree code that we're thinking about putting in. You might want to put in a different kind of tree that's on the approved tree code because it'll probably be the law by the time you actually start building. So just modify the site design now to match the code that will be there in the future. And in most situations, the person that's developing is very willing to go like, oh yeah, that's super easy, we can make that change, no problem. Or if you say something to the effect of, hey, I noticed you've got a parking lot on this thing, there is an ADA parking spot that's on the parking lot, but it's way off in the back corner. Why not put it up near the front of the apartment complex, right next to where that would be much more convenient. I think that's even required by the ADA, so it's a bad example. But you can make requests for modifications within what is already planned, and as long as it's reasonable and it connects to the local code, most developers go, absolutely, no problem. I want to work with you as much as you want to work with me. This is a team effort. And so the Planning Commission does exert a certain amount of interesting control over what a design ends up looking like. You can have impacts on that. You can go like, yeah, in this town, we don't do the like postmodern box houses thing. It would be the weirdest looking house in the entire city. So, maybe you could design it to look less like a weird abstract painting, and the developer might go, yeah, that seems reasonable to me. I can make those changes very easily. There's, we had two variants of what we were thinking about doing, and that's one of them, and I can always just put out the other one, and that's the one we can use. Here are my two options. Which one do you like more? So site design review allows the city planning commission and the developer to essentially line up their ideas and make sure that everything works for everybody. Non-conforming use and non-conforming use permits are where an applicant wants to change the usage of the property in a manner that is just strictly out of compliance with the zone. So for example, a wine cellar is in a commercial zone, has the zone changed around it into a residential one zone, like 1 acre residential zone. The wine cellar is still there. Just because the zone changes doesn't mean it's stopped getting used as a wine cellar. It's what grandfathering is the old term. There's a new phrase for it that I don't remember what exactly it's like an inherited use, something like that. And the wine cellar goes like, well, we're a wine cellar. We would like to add a restaurant and a tasting room because our wine cellar has been very popular. We want to add that piece on. That's not conforming with the residential zone necessarily, but you can ask for a non-conforming use permit. Hey, city, we understand that this is not allowed in this zone. Nonetheless, it would be super helpful if we could put this on. Here are the reasons why it's appropriate. Here's why we don't think it's going to be super impactful on the city. In these situations of a non-conforming use, the Planning Commission has a pretty substantial impact on the decision-making process. And in a lot of situations, it's a value judgment call on whether or not the non-conforming use is allowed or not allowed. Some cities will allow them willy-nilly, some cities won't. It depends, is sort of the answer on that. But you can allow someone to essentially non-conform with the zone at present and do something that's an extension of its current use in a way that is non-conforming. That's sometimes allowed, and the city has a hold on that. Code interpretation. So local government codes, municipal codes, are written by people. In some cases by lawyers, and lawyers are people too, and we all make mistakes. And ambiguities and errors are all over. Planning commissions are allowed to make opinion statements. You can ask the Planning Commission to give you an opinion on what the meaning of a code is when a question arises. This is an example from my life. The City of Carleton's code in 2022 defined a bike lane one time, and then never again in the code was it ever used. So there was the concept of bike lanes, and then never again did they use the word bike lane. Instead, they used bicycle lane and bicycle ways interchangeably. And a bicycle lane had to be between 4 and 6 feet wide and had to be striped. And a bicycle way had to be between 5 and 10 feet wide, but did not have to be striped. And so if somebody wants to put in a bike lane, they had no idea what they were supposed to build. You could build one that was 6 feet wide and stripe it and be pretty confident on that. But if you were trying to minimize your costs and you wanted to build a 4 foot wide bike lane, that might not have been appropriate because that was a bicycle way that you were supposed to build there. Or if you wanted to build one that was 10 feet wide because you really like bikes and they go, whoa, that's not allowed here. This is a bicycle lane. That is too wide for our bicycle lanes here in this city. And so basically you had to ask the city, what in the world do you mean when you say bike lane? What are you supposed to do here? And the city planning commission is able to make an opinion statement about what the term means, how it's supposed to be. They can clarify the ambiguity. This is a place where the city planning commission can be wrong quite like guidance is helpful there, but just be aware sometimes the code is really ambiguous or not clear, and the planning commission is oftentimes asked, can you clarify what you mean by this? When you say you need a bike lane, what does that mean? Define it for us. When you say you need appropriate parking, what is appropriate parking? Tell me what that means, city planning commission, let me know. And that'll help the developer basically just plan accordingly based on the definitions of the planning commission. Partitioning is another thing that happens. In most low density zones, you only get a single dwelling for each lot of record. Some places will also allow a single ADU. If it's a residential zone, I believe Oregon requires that you allow a single ADU on that low density single lot of record. A legal lot of record, the importance of the term legal lot of record is that in most cases, you can only build a dwelling and one ADU on a legal lot of record. You can't have more than that. So if you want to build 5 or 6 or 7 houses in one place where there was just one house on a big yard, you need to partition that. You need to split it up into a smaller chunk. Each of them is then a legal lot of record with its own special legal description that says this is the boundary of this one specific plot that can have its one house and one ADU. And this other thing that we've just created is a new legal lot of record that can have its one house and one ADU. The zoning requirements will usually lay out minimum acreage and setbacks. So if you're going to do a partition, then you have to make sure it works with that. You can't take a 1 acre plot on a minimum 1 acre size zone and say, we're going to split it into 2 half-acre plots. Haha, we got around the zone. You can't do that. It'll get denied by the planning commission. It'll get denied by city staff. It gets denied pretty rapidly at that point. But this is essentially what it is. This is the process of turning one thing into two things, or turning one thing into three things. If you want to turn it into four things, we call it a subdivision. It's the same process. It's just that's the term we use for four or more buildings being like lots being created out of one original lot. So if you're wanting to create a whole subdivision complex out of one big old open farm piece, like back in the day, it used to be you would have 480 acre plots. Was pretty normal. We don't see those that often these days, but some of them still exist, and sometimes you'll buy up a 480 acre plot and want to split it up into some planned development that has all kinds of special stuff going on. You subdivide that big plot into a whole bunch of little legal plots, and each one of those little plots can have its own house on it, and in some cases can also have an ADU. Functionally, process is exactly the same, it's just bigger. Now, planned unit developments, sometimes it's an unfortunate abbreviation, but people call them PUDs. A PUD is a variation of subdivision that is a comprehensive development with cohesive singular designs spread across the entire subdivision. This is becoming more popular these days as a way of doing subdivision development because you can essentially say, I want to have 50 houses that all look the same way and feel the same way. So we have this one neighborhood that's got the same ambiance to it, and it's got that what je ne sais quoi that they're going for. And these planned unit developments will oftentimes have like a park built into it, and they'll have some sort of other stuff tossed on top, and they'll put in sometimes shops and things like that, and community centers if it's a big enough planned unit development. But this is essentially a master planned subdivision, is a PUD. Oftentimes, local governments will grant a PUD, a planned unit development, a larger amount of flexibility in what they can do. It depends on the city, but some cities will make it easier for a planned unit development to do various things because they're doing global design and it streamlines stuff. And so rather than saying we want to make sure you do every single house in this very specific way, the planned unit development may have relaxed standards, and it allows for certain things to happen in certain ways. So, for example, if you're building a big complex with a whole bunch of townhomes and row houses and things like that, you may be allowed to ignore certain yard setbacks that would otherwise be required under city laws just because it's a planned unit development, but that's going to be something that's baked into the municipal ordinances themselves if the city has that special like flexibility for PUDs involved. Planning commissions also have vacations. This is not like a fun time in Tijuana. This is a vacating a street. This is where a planning commission will make a recommendation to the city council that a road or a right-of-way be terminated, and it just gets split down the middle and given to all the adjacent parcels. This is how a road dies. Roads are not eternal creatures. They can be ended, and that's done through city council decision. Oftentimes, the planning commission will make the recommendation to the city. This happens a lot of times where you'll have these weird little like flag lot pieces that are oftentimes it's a dead-end street that was supposed to match to another one, but then the development just didn't pan out, and so there's this weird little dead end at the end of a road, and it only has two houses across it, and the owners of that road might say, can we just not? Can we just end that? That's not a road anymore. It doesn't exist, and we can just take that land and tear up the street and build a garden or whatever they want to do with it. But you can sometimes have that where they'll vacate a road, split it away, and utilize it for other purposes. My experience of vacating roads is it most often happened with commercial enterprises that wanted to use the street for some sort of a storage or to use the street for some like restaurant tables that they could put out on the street and not worry about somebody plowing into it. If you vacate the street, you don't have to worry about it. It's not a road anymore. So that's what planning commissions are integrally involved in the death of a road. One of the large things after site design review, probably the second most common thing you'll see after site design review and the appeals from conditional use permits and things like that, is a zone change. Cities are broken up into classified areas that are known as zones. The zones tell you what you can and can't do in that area. It is a restrictive standard that says here's what you aren't allowed to build here. The city has granted you only the permission to build the following things within this zone. If done properly, it's supposed to manage noise, traffic flow, resources, and compatibility of uses. You don't want to have, for example, like the blackjack firework factory right next to a preschool. That's a bad mixture of uses. The zones will probably prohibit that sort of use being adjacent to each other. And that's done intentionally with the idea of essentially sectioning off certain uses from others. It's the reason why if you go into most places, you'll find that the residential areas are sort of socketed away into nice quiet areas, and you got a commercial region and an industrial region of the city. It's because those uses are seen as, this is sort of an outcropping of nuisance law and various other things, but essentially there are some uses that don't work well with others, and the zones ensure that those conflicts don't happen as often. This is the map of right where the Oregon Realtors building is. That little sign you see there, that's the Oregon Realtors building. We are in an industrial commercial zone within the city of Salem. If you look directly above it, that red thing is a retail commercial zone. That's a luxury automobile place, something like that. That little pink salmon looking thing is a commercial office structure. That one is a maxillofacial dental facility, something like that. The city decides what can and can't be built in all of these various places. RS is residential. That's so everything in the yellow zones is residential, and it's defined. The city is a patchwork of permitted uses. These patchworks can change. You can modify your zone. It allows you to do all kinds of stuff. If you buy a piece of land that's zoned exclusive farm use and you're like, but I want to build like a subdivision on this exclusive farm use plot, you may have to change the zone because you can't build a subdivision on exclusive farm land. There are other things at play if you're doing exclusive farmland, but just be aware. If you want to do certain things, if you have a client that goes like, oh, I want to build this, I want to buy this house and I can't wait to tear this parcel of land. I'm going to tear down the existing house and put up a duplex. Well, look at the code. See if that's allowed in the zone. If it's not allowed in the zone, you can't build a duplex without going through an extraordinary non-conforming use request, which would generally just be easier to do a zone change request. So it has a substantial impact on what you can and can't do with your various properties. A zone change can be done as long as the city finds that the area still complies with the city's comprehensive plan. The city has to have a certain amount of space for a certain amount of stuff, and the stuff has to be protected in certain ways. So I can't just take a residential area in the middle of a neighborhood and be like, I want to turn this into a cement factory. City, we need more industry, so I think we should put in a cement factory. The city will probably go, yeah, it doesn't really work with our comp plan because the whole like residential thing, you're supposed to have quiet enjoyment, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that stops you from putting in that cement factory. If you wanted to build a preschool in an area and it's zoned commercial or something and preschools aren't allowed, but it's right next to the industrial or the residential region, the city might go, you know what, that's appropriate. We can do this. We will change that industrial thing into whatever allows a preschool, light residential, something like that. And then we have a glut of industrial land elsewhere, so we're just taking away from our oversupply, and that allows this zone change. What that means, though, is if you don't have enough of certain zones, you may not be able to make the change. If there is not enough industrial land in a city already, I probably can't buy a vacant industrial plot and then ask for a zone change and turn it residential because the city's already pushed to the limit of what it can do within its comprehensive plan. It has to have these certain standards of what it has for building into the future. You usually need to prove, if you're going to ask for a zone change, that there's no comparably zoned property in the area that serves the same needs. So this happens pretty regularly when somebody buys up a piece of parcel or property around residences, says like, I'm going to put in a grocery store. The city goes like, well, there's a grocery store down the street, so we don't need two. Why should we allow this? And you have to explain in depth why it would be appropriate if, you know, it's actually a food desert because that grocery store is Whole Foods, which is not an affordable grocery store. It's a different thing. You can make reasons and explanations for why the thing is appropriate. It just depends on the circumstance. City council will ultimately make the decision, but the planning commission makes recommendations based on what they hear about the need and the requirements and all that other stuff. There's also the concept of annexation. Cities have a maximum outer boundary. It's called their urban growth boundary. It's as far as you can stretch a city. And their city limits can be expanded up to that boundary without taking land from the county or requiring some other additional approval. When a city border is expanded, when you move the urban growth boundary, it's called an annexation. So if we have a city that has maximally expanded its city limits and it's all the way stretched out, it's like a goldfish in a tiny tank that's just way too, there's not enough space left over. At that point, the city can request, hey county, could we take over 20 acres up north because our city is bursting at the seams and we need this. Annexation is complicated. Many cities in Oregon have already annexed almost all land up to their urban growth boundary. or I'm sorry, I've got that wrong. The urban growth boundary expansion is a different thing. Annexation is when you're growing out to the urban growth boundary. Most cities have already annexed everything within their urban growth boundaries, which means they have to ask for expansions of the UGB, which is when you have to ask the county for permission, get special district approval. If there's a fire district that's not covering that part and you want it to cover, you have to get that expansion out there. You need to get approval from LCDC, which is a thing in its own right. It's a whole task. But if you're within your urban growth boundary, you can annex land. Sorry, I used the wrong term originally. You can annex land and add it into your city limits without having to get ARCH approval from LCDC and other groups. Example time, this is Salem and Kaiser. This is City of Salem's city limits. So if you're talking about the City of Salem, that's what we're talking about. This red thing is the City of Salem up north, to the northern part of Salem. This is City of Salem's urban growth boundary. If that red thing wants to expand into this blue thing, it can. That's an annexation. It's an easier process. If City of Salem expanded all the way into and filled the whole blue line, then anything it does from that point onwards would require additional approval from governmental bodies and from the county and from special districts to move the line of that blue border to allow the red line to then grow even further. And so for Salem, for example, there's actually quite a bit of space it can annex into. Salem has the ability to grow. For other cities, not the case. Annexation is going to be a commission recommendation to the council. If the commission recommends that the city council annex land and grow within its urban growth boundary, then there's a public hearing and the city will decide whether or not they think the annexation is appropriate. And if that does meet their planned goals, their comprehensive plan goals, then the city will oftentimes approve that annexation. It's not necessarily a guarantee. Sometimes you don't want to annex stuff in because people don't want to be a part of it. Landowners oftentimes don't want to be a part of the city because then they have to pay extra for various city services. And so some people might say, don't annex me, I don't want to be a part of this. And there becomes an entire question at play. Planning commissions can help with land use district map changes. You can recommend changes to the zoning districts. For example, you have a city that only has high density and low density residential, and you want to introduce middle housing. You can do that sort of thing. You can request that the city plan growth of the zones and what it allows. These sort of land use district map changes are something where the city is given a recommendation by the planning commission, and the planning commission will say why it's a good idea or bad idea to do whatever they're doing, and the city council will vote yes, no on that sort of thing, and the city council can modify their land use zoning maps and their rules relating to that through ordinance. You can also amend development codes. The planning commission can recommend changes to the development code. Hey, city, we have this thing that said you have to have a fireplace in every single house. There has to be a wood stove because that law was written, the ordinance was written in the 1930s. And we probably don't need that anymore because a lot of people are using central heating and it's a different thing. So can we just remove that from the development code? It's causing problems. You can recommend changes to the development code. And oftentimes the city won't be super attuned into the pieces of the development code that need to change. They're more concerned about things that are like the hot button topics, taxation, budgeting, staffing, that sort of thing. The planning commission is very attuned to what the development code says. If the development code is recommending something that feels absurd, the planning commission can recommend that the city modify its development code. This happens rarely, but it probably should happen very often. Planning commissions should regularly be looking through their own development codes and going, hey city, does this make sense? Does it make sense that we have to have a tree in the front yard of every single house? If so, then that's great, but let's consider it, let's think about it again, because maybe we want to change that. Planning commissions make a recommendation, they don't get to make these changes. City council makes these changes, county council, the powers that be make this change, you make a recommendation if you're on the planning commission. To amend the development code, oftentimes this requires something where the planning commission provides notice of something that's going wrong. I'm going to give an example. This is not a real life example, but it's mimicked through most cities in Oregon. This is not something that actually happened, but it's the case in a lot of cities. City has 3 zones of residential housing. There's a low density zone that allows up to 4 dwellings per acre. There's a medium density zone that allows up to 8 dwellings per acre. And there's a high density zone that has 3 to 12 dwellings per acre. The city has noticed that they are just not getting enough middle density. There are no townhomes, nobody's building duplexes, nobody's building triplexes. We just don't have this stuff, and we can't figure out why. Our medium density zones, even those ones, don't have these things built. And the developers are explaining, well, we make a much bigger profit on a house with a half-acre parcel. If we can slam a big house on a big parcel, we make a large profit. If we have to put a whole bunch of little houses on little parcels, we make less of a profit. So we, the developers, are building big houses on big parcels. So then amending the development code, like how would you fix your development code through amendment here? Question for the class. I'm curious if somebody's got like a real quick answer. This one. If your problem is that the developers and the economics of development are saying we're going to build big houses on big parcels, and your zones allow big houses on big parcels, how would you encourage middle dwelling density? Anybody? Incentives, that's one way. Another way, you can put a carrot on it. You can also change the zoning. You can say, okay, medium density, you gotta build between 3 and 8 dwellings per acre. Tax incentives is a great way to get the developers to do that, but in some cases, tax incentives is only the city paying for the difference on these things. And if a city has a medium density zone that needs more middle density housing, you make it something where medium density is required, 3 to 8 dwellings. If you want to do high density, you can do 8 to 15 dwellings per acre, something like that. You can modify the numbers on those zones to encourage certain things happening. This is something that many of the cities, when I was city council, they were arguing like, we don't have enough middle density and we're just not getting it. And every single city I looked at had this exact same standard. Low density set a small number to a maximum that was very small. Medium density said between 0 and a somewhat larger number. But what developers were doing was building close to 0 every single time. As a result, it just wasn't happening. The developers didn't want to. The city can push in both directions. They can push by modifying the zone to say, if you're in a medium density zone, you have to build the following way. Or you can put incentives on it. I like the people that are suggesting incentives. That is a great way to encourage things as well. But being what it is, cities are sometimes able to push in different directions. You can also recommend revisions to the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is the city's 20-year plan. It's broad scope of what we're going to look like in the next 20 years, how we're going to grow, what the future needs, how we're going to ensure we have enough schools and infrastructure and natural resources and open spaces and all that stuff that you need in a fully working comprehensive city. So sometimes the cities are going to need to change their comprehensive plan. Sometimes things change. Every so often regularly a comprehensive plan is not accurate. If you think 20 years ago, think back to 2005. Did the world look like it does now? Probably not. Maybe in some places it did, but in a lot of regions it's very different. And the difference of 20 years is a lot. And so at times you want to change the comp plan midstream. You want to update things as you go and modify your comp plan to encourage certain things. That's kind of the case right now where we're trying to improve the amount of middle density and high density housing in Oregon because there's just not much of it. Many comprehensive plans could be updated right now to encourage those things rather than waiting for the next amendment or like revision or full redo of the comprehensive plan. Some cities will allow the Planning Commission to investigate, research, and eventually recommend to a city council that they amend their comp plan. Not every city. In your city, if it is allowed though, you are able to say, hey guys, we should really make these changes. We should look into changing this part of the comp plan. We've done our research. This is how the city of Sherwood does it. This is how, I don't know why I'm picking Sherwood every single time. This is how Dallas, this is how Hines does it, and it's working well for them. So maybe we should think about doing that too. The City Planning Commission is able to do independent research for the city. Very few planning commissions do, unless they are specifically tasked with it. A person does not generally independently go out and do this research, but a planning commission has every right to, within the statute itself. Now, that's the basic actions of a planning commission. There's always going to be some variance depending on your area. Some might have additional things you can do. Some will have fewer things you can do. Most will have this list of actions that can be taken. Now, how do actions actually get taken? This is where it gets all fiddly with things. Decisions of the Planning Commission are using the Roberts Rules of Order. If you've ever been to one of the Oregon Realtors conventions or a board of directors meeting or like been on a nonprofit board or anything where people are voting, the library commission, that sort of thing, they have the Roberts Rules of order almost everywhere. It is a arch structured version of motion practice and methodical voting and layering of voting so that things are addressed in specific orders. Question in chat, do municipalities generally prescribe how often the comp plan is required to be revised or revisited, or is it generally just when needed? A comp plan has to be redone every 20 years, no matter what, but that can take some time. There's a great example, and Brock, you're in the chat, so if you want to answer on this one as well in the chat. One of the cities in Oregon, I believe it's Bend, has a comp plan amendment that they've been working on for quite a while, and the comp plan didn't get approved until it was like 10 or 15 years into the comp plan itself, which means once it got approved, it was good for 5 years, which is sort of irrelevant at that point. And it's because the actual action of getting it approved took so long because they had to work through all these other things of like how you improve housing and how you map and balance all these various competing goals. And so the actual plan, like process of getting your comp plan put in place can take so long that by the time you adopt it, it's already obsolete. And so municipalities at this point, my understanding is most of them just do it once every 20 years because the actual process is, go for it, Brock.
Yeah, I was going to say this was what I've heard from now retired land use attorney that used to advise the commission and has worked with some cities in Central Oregon. But yes, the city of Bend's UGB amendment and the process they went through for that, I believe, took about 16 years, 15, 16 years. And so by the time they ended up getting it adopted, only about a quarter of the timeline that they were planning the UGB amendment for was actually applicable to the UGB amendment because so much time had already passed. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
It's a complex administrative process. Now, within the Robert's Rules of Orders context, this means everything that's done by a planning commission is usually done by motion, and usually city staff will provide the standards for you. I move to approve. I move to reject. They'll say all the things you can do, but you're not held only to what the city council suggests. An example of this would be someone says, I move to approve the application based on the staff report. That's a very normal motion in a planning commission. Staff will provide a report. It'll say, do the thing or don't do the thing. And you'll say, I move to approve based on this. And someone seconds it. Once it's seconded, it's handed to the whole body planning commission. Now you get to argue about it and vote. If it's not seconded, it just dies on the vine and nobody cares. But if someone says seconded, then there will be a vote on that item. Seconded, great, vote. One person says yes, 6 people say no. So somebody that was going to say no, they seconded it just so they could shoot it down. No. 6 people say, in this case, nay is what I've written down, but the Robert's Rules of Order actually say you're supposed to say no because too many people saying nay sounds like horses or something like that. It's the actual reason for Robert's Rule. They say use no because nay sounds too much like I. So that motion would fail. Great. That's what it would look like in an ideal world. Let me give you an example of how it works in the real world. Reality. I move to approve the application with the condition that the sprinklers be installed before occupancy. Seconded. 2 commissioners go, I vote yes. I vote yes. A 3rd commissioner goes, I vote yes. But how about instead of sprinklers, we just require that they put in smoke alarms. And all the remaining 6 commissioners go, yeah, that's a good idea. I agree with commissioner number 3. We should approve only the smoke alarms, not the sprinkler system, just smoke alarms. I vote yes. Motion passes 9-0. 9 people said yes. But that wasn't the language that passed. The motion was with sprinklers. It wasn't smoke alarms. You can't change the vote midstream just by adding a rider onto your vote. You either vote yes or no. You don't vote yes, but. And so what would happen in that situation is it should have been a 3rd commissioner would say, I move to amend the existing motion so that the approval condition only requires smoke alarms, not sprinklers. And then everyone would vote on the amendment. And if they vote yes on the amendment, then they would vote on the whole thing. Okay, now that we've improved the amendment, how do we feel about saying yes to this whole design with smoke alarms rather than sprinklers? And so there's this layering of voting that must occur. And when it's done in the way that it is in the real world, you oftentimes will get this thing where if you go back through the minutes afterwards, you look at it and go, that's not what we approved. The thing that we're doing right now is not what the vote was supposed to do. And it's just because Robert's Rules of Orders were written for a time when people wore wigs in ancient England, and that's not the way we're doing stuff anymore, so it's kind of obsolete. But because parliamentary practice is what it is, we don't have a better tool. So it is what it is. It's what we've got. So what you really want to do if you're on a planning commission is suggest amendments to things. If you want to say yes to something, but you want to suggest an amendment and let the committee then decide on it. In that situation where 6 people go, I agree with that, that's a good point. 7 people have already agreed to the amendment. So if you put out an amendment, it absolutely would have been approved. great. This thing would have been fine. If a city rules, if the city's rules allow it, the mover, the person that presents the motion, can approve friendly amendments. This is not technically part of Robert's rules. They don't have friendly amendments, but everybody that does parliamentary practice that has like a time horizon or is trying to get things done, they allow it. A friendly horizon is where a friendly amendment is where the person that made the motion goes, I've moved the following way, and somebody goes, would you suggest, I have a friendly amendment. Would you like to change it for the following thing? And if the person goes, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, you can just slap the movement change into it. It's as though you withdrew your suggestion and put in the new one. Friendly amendment has been made. If somebody seconds it, technically it's supposed to be voted on and there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, but I know many city councils and many bodies in general that follow Robert's rules that allow friendly amendments just because it speeds up the process of not having to do this really formal like two-step dance of move, amend, move. So it depends on your city. You'll have your own customs wherever you are, and many of them will allow friendly amendments or like in-flight modifications of the motion. Planning commissions, this is a very, if you're ever going to be on a planning commission, listen to this part. Planning commissions are public bodies. That means they hold public meetings, and that means Oregon's open meeting laws apply. Discussions and deliberations about public meeting topics have to be available to the public. If a quorum of individuals from the planning commission discusses an item from a planning commission meeting, they have created a meeting. And the public was supposed to be aware of it and able to attend. You can create what are called serial meetings. I send a text to you, hey, how do you feel about this development? I don't know if I like it that much. I'm thinking I'll vote no. And then you forward it on to 5 other people on the planning commission. What do you guys think about it? I'm thinking about voting no as well. We now have created a meeting through our email chain. Even if I email you and then you email one other person and they email one other person, and eventually we can like tie the net back together and say all 5, a majority of the planning commission has had discussions about this topic amongst themselves. That's a public meeting. And that can cause lawsuits, very real lawsuits. There's a case called Handy versus Lane County, where a guy, Rob Handy, was a planning commission member, and he had a discussion with 3 other commissioners where they deliberated through phone calls and emails and text messages about what decision they would have about releasing a letter that was sort of rude to another person. Even though they made that decision in the end, the same decision that was made in this serial meeting through telephone and email was the same decision the council made in the actual hearing. The fact that there was a discussion had before it was a public meeting made it actually illegal. And you can get sued as a city very easily over these things. And because everything is public, there should be public records, which means there could be public record requests, which means if you send emails to another a council member, and it's about planning commission stuff, that's on the public record. So be very, very cautious in how you converse with other members of a planning commission if you are on a planning commission or a city council, because serial meetings will happen relatively quickly. Now, from there, this is my soapbox. It's the last slide of our training, and this is the last thing we've got. One of the main powers of a planning commission is that you can recommend stuff for the future. You can recommend modifications, you can recommend future changes, future growth, future planning, future aesthetic design decision. You can study the need for growth to figure out what your area needs, what is working in your region, what's not working in your region. You can do those things and make recommendations. The city council is a bunch of people who are harried with what they're trying to do. They are trying their best, most of the time. The city council is oftentimes filled with volunteers who are trying to do the best thing for their region that they can, and they have to be pulled in many, many different directions. They have to know how staffing works, how people are going to vote on the marijuana shop that wants to be put in down the road. They need to know all these kinds of things, and they oftentimes don't think critically about what do we want the future of our city's land to look like. The planning commission gets that luxury, but many planning commissions don't. Many planning commissions will regularly cancel their meetings because there's no new business, because nobody put in a site design review, nobody's asking for anything that needs a planning commission, so they cancel their meetings. If you get involved on a planning commission, if you join a planning commission, if I have one thing that I can accomplish through this training, change the status quo. Encourage your planning commission. If they don't have any business at their next meeting, to make it a plan for the future kind of meeting where you think about all the various powers that planning commission is imbued with, and you do stuff to change the future of your city's planning codes, to modify things into the future, to make suggestions to the city council. Because when you have no new business, it is your chance to make new business. Now, nobody likes a night meeting. They're oftentimes pretty dreadful. Night meetings take a lot of time. They oftentimes go over long. But the future of your city can be changed in a single night meeting with a good suggestion. So if you can, get involved at a local planning level. It is radically important, especially in Oregon where we have Senate Bill 100 and local planning is hugely relevant to how we do land use. If you can get involved, get involved. It is very, very important, and it can help your practice because you'll just know what is happening in your area around you. That's what I've got. That is the Planning Commission 101 training.